This is Gregory Shelton with Historic Living, Modern World. So we're finally back at the kitchen at Poplar Hall, and now we're talking about winter. We're really talking about comfort food, to kind of hunker down by the fireplace. Beef stew is one of the things that I was raised on. My mother's beef stew was unbelievable. It basically fed a family of 5 people, 5 kids, and it was so incredibly hearty and it was rustic. I'm making a little changes to it by adding a really good red wine, garlic, and some different herbs, but it's still going to serve the same purpose. It's going to be perfect, and I can't wait to try it. So a great stew starts out with very rustic vegetables, and I'm going to talk about how they're cut in a second. But let's talk about what we have. So we have 3 nice-sized russet potatoes. I always recommend for stews and things using russets. If you use like Yukon Gold, they will tend to be mushy and kind of fall apart. You do not want that. You want your potatoes to stay strong. A couple cloves of garlic, a couple stalks of celery, a nice single onion, and about 5 to 6 standard sized carrots, and then a couple bay leaves. So let's get cutting and get prepping for our stew. Okay, so we're going to be prepping our vegetables. And I am a big stickler when it comes to the look and feel of vegetables in beef stew. A lot of people tend to dice things. This is a rustic stew. It's not meant to be little perfect little dices. So when you're cutting things like celery and carrots, I like to make sure, first of all, that they're all the same size. That's incredibly important when you're cooking anything, because that means that they will all cook the same amount. You won't have some that are cooked more than others. You do not want that. But I like to cut my vegetables rustic, and I like to cut them on the bias. I think that looks the best, and that gives you a very beautiful vegetable that when you're eating your stew, it will really show nicely in the gravy that you create. Next are our carrots. So just take the ends off. Okay, next you're going to be peeling your carrots. Another thing I like to tell people when they're peeling carrots, time can be an issue sometimes if you have a lot of carrots to peel. And a blade on a carrot peeler or a standard peeler has 2 blades on both sides. So remember, if you're getting a time crunch, you can use both sides of the blade. So when you're cutting your carrots, you want to make sure you do the same thing that you did with your celery. Should be on the bias, and you have a carrot that gets bigger and smaller on the ends. So you want to, in your mind, imagine what the same amount would be, not essentially the size. So for example, if I'm doing on the bias, that's about the same size when you break it down. So I tend to cut here, half my carrots, and then you're going to get the same look and feel that you have with your celery. Okay, next is your onion. Now it's time for the beef, which is one of the most important parts of a beef stew. Now I have these cut in basically inch chunks, and you can use either a bottom round or a chuck roast, either or. They're really not fine cuts of meat, but when you're making a beef stew, you're almost braising it. So the cartilage that's in the beef needs to break down by cooking it for almost 2 to 2.5 hours. So that's important to make this beef really succulent, to render its fat and make the gravy taste amazing. Now, what you need to do now is we're going to be dredging this beef in flour. I put a 1/2 cup of flour in a Ziploc bag. I also used about a 1/2 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. Always use freshly ground. So what we're going to be doing is we're putting our beef into the bag, and this is really going to be dredging all of this beef. And this is important because ultimately, that's going to provide the crust that you're going to need for your beef. The flour, when it's cooked in a hot oil, it's going to give a nice crust to your beef. Really, really, really important to make a great beef stew. Seal your bag up, and a nice shake. So when you're making a beef stew, you really need to make it in a Dutch oven. So I want to let you know about one of the tools of the trade that I literally almost can't live without when I cook, and that's my Le Creuset. Now, Le Creuset is a wonderful product. It's a cast iron Dutch oven, and ultimately, it's one of the best in the business. They do amazing products, and they're known for their look and the way they use. But this is an amazing product. Le Creuset has been around since 1925, and Le Creuset means it's a French product, and in French that basically means the word crucible. So you have your oil in your pan, your Dutch oven. Put your heat on, and you want this to start sizzling. That way you know it's ready to sear the beef. Okay. So when you're putting your beef in, very important, you want to make sure that your beef isn't crowded. It will not brown correctly if it's crowded. You want to make sure you're giving some room to each piece. Okay, so our first round of beef are browned on each side. So what you want to do is take them out, and we're going to be moving to the next round of beef to brown the rest of it. Okay, so you have your pan on. I use about a cup and a half of red wine. Use whatever you like. Add a little bit extra. Red wine is what makes this beautiful. The goal here is to let the wine heat up and bubble, and you want to scrape the bottom of the pan. Now, Le Creuset Dutch ovens are cast iron covered in porcelain. Metal tools will ruin these. So I'm using a nice handmade wood spoon, and you're really just going to be reducing the wine, but at the same time you're scraping the bottom to grab those little bits. That's what deglazing is. You're doing two things. You're reducing the amount of alcohol in the wine, so that's what's cooking off in the steam, and you're really going to get the flavor of the grapes in with the beef flavor of what was left from the bits of the roast beef. Wine is what really makes this a beautiful looking gravy. So, we have our wine reduced. Now what I'm going to be adding is about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Now I like to make sure that the tomato paste is cooked off a bit. You can always add more if you need to, but that's something that you really need to do, and it's really, really important because it kind of enriches the flavor of the tomato paste also. Put your pan back on the heat, and your beef will go back into the pot. Okay, next stage, you want to add 3.5 cups of really, really good beef broth. Then you want to add 2 bay leaves to your mixture. Perfectly done. Dutch oven top back on. Medium to 3/4 medium heat. And you're going to let this sit for about 1.5 hours and let it simmer down, and then the beef's going to be ready to be added to make your stew. So we let our beef cook for about 1 hour to 1.5 hours. It's very soft. The gravy looks beautiful. And now what we're going to be doing is adding the rest of our vegetables. We're going to add that to the stew together. Gosh, it's such a beautiful, dark, rich colored gravy. Oh, it smells great. Wow. Okay, give it a nice quick stir. And then we're going to let this cook down for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we're going to add our potatoes. That's going to cook down for a little bit. And then we are almost done this beautiful rustic stew. So our potatoes have been cooking for about 15 minutes, which tells you they're close to being done. And what I want to do at this point, let the potatoes cook a little bit longer just to make sure, but I want to add some herbs. And then we're going to be using dried thyme, about 1 tablespoon, and then parsley. So we're using dried. I recommend using fresh. Dried will be fine for this. You're really adding that to taste, but it is going to, thyme goes really well with beef, and a gravy like this will really benefit from that herb. Oh my gosh, I can tell it smells wonderful. Our potatoes are tender, as are our carrots and celery. So we're gonna let this cook for about 5 more minutes. We're gonna take out our bay leaves because they are unedible. And then we're gonna be able to serve it, and I wanna taste this stew because it looks beautiful. Okay, so we're ready to spoon our homemade beef stew in our bowl, and it's ready to try it. When you spoon it into your plate, you want to have a nice, look how beautifully rich that gravy is. Just looks beautiful. Always make sure you don't want to overcook your vegetables. A lot of people like to have vegetables that are cooked so much. I don't think that's something that you need to do. So let's give it a taste. So our beef stew is done. We have these beautiful bias cut vegetables, carrots and potatoes and celery. Should taste perfectly. I can tell they're perfectly cooked. The beef looks nice and dark brown, but really the star of this show is the gravy. It has a brownish orange color to it, which reminds me of why we did our tomato paste and the red wine. I can smell the red wine coming through. It's going to taste great. Let's give it a shot. Oh my gosh. The wine and the garlic and the tomato paste, it has a sweetness to it that's so incredibly rich. Do not cut corners. Make sure you let that cook for as long as the recipe asks, because you will not be sorry. Oh my gosh, delicious. This is something you want to eat when you're home during a snowstorm or it's raining. Oh my gosh, so delicious. This would even be good if you want to throw some mushrooms in there or other root vegetables. And to me, that's what a good beef stew is. The beef is cooked perfectly. I love the little pieces of garlic. One more taste for the road. If you enjoy what you see here, click like and subscribe. This is Gregory Shelton with Historic Living, Modern World, reminding you, whenever you try to do something, always make sure you work to move people. Cheers. Oh man. Oh wow, so delicious. One of my favorite things.